early fall. Um, and if they're going through here at Fort Griffin, they would have been going up the Western Trail, Great Western Trail, straight to Dodge City. Where we're at right here tonight, we are um, on the banks of the Mill Creek here behind me, literally 20 feet behind me, and just a quarter mile from the banks of the Clear Fork of the Brazos. And this would have been one of the camping places that they would have camped the herds as they went up the trail. They stopped here at Fort Griffin and resupplied for a couple of days, and then went on up the trail. And they moved 10 to 15 miles a day. These big steers will walk. Longhorns in general will walk 6 to 8 miles a day in their normal grazing pattern. So it was a leisurely walk for them. It wasn't a lot of work. The cattle would actually a lot of times gain weight on the trip. But the big story really happened after they got to Dodge City. They sold these cattle for a lot of money, and most of the trail drivers at the time still demanded payment in coin, which at the time was U.S. Mint gold double eagle, worth about $20 at the time, and or in a $20 denomination. And they brought that money back with them back down the trails. They sold the cattle, headed home with any of their cowboys that wanted to head back with them, and horses and a few lead steers like we have here tonight. And they were moving in a hurry. And the reason they were moving in a hurry, up to 35 miles a day on the trip back, was because they were trying to stay ahead of word of mouth and anyone that might give up where they were and what they were doing, because they were carrying a lot of money with them. And that was the reason for the hurry on the trip back. So as we came back down the trails, they're following generally the same route, but they would probably be skipping campgrounds. They would be, skipping a couple of campgrounds and staying about at every second or third one. And they were headed back home for the holidays with a lot of money. It'd be a big celebration when they got home. But they were kind of moving incognito. They wanted to basically stay as quiet and move as fast as they could and get home safely. And interestingly enough, they thought it important enough that they needed to bring their big steers back home with them. Lead steers at the time were something that was very valuable to them because the lead steers helped them move cattle up the trail. The other cattle would follow them. These steers had been up the trail several times before and moved with a knowledge of where they were going and didn't take a lot of direction from the cowboys. You could turn them loose, head them up the trail, and the other cattle would follow. Helped them cross flooded rivers and difficult terrain that the other cattle might not try by themselves. So these steers were pretty valuable. So and they would have been about the size of these big guys in the pens here behind me, older steers, 12 to 15 years old. And that was their lead steers that they thought valuable enough to bring back and not sell. And their horses, sometimes they would have a chuck wagon like we have one out here tonight. Maybe sometimes not. They might just carry everything in their saddlebags, move as quick as possible. And like we're standing here tonight, we've got supper ready. I've got biscuits and stew and some coffee. But instead of making camp mid-afternoon like they would with the trail herd and letting the cattle graze all afternoon, they weren't stopping until after dark. They would stop and make a quick fire, reheat some stew from the night before. Might cook something new every 3 or 4 days, but the goal was not to really have their holiday fare until they got home. And what I've got here tonight, I think I've got, Frank, if you got the phone ready, I'll show you all what we've been cooking. This would be pretty typical of the trail herd. I set my coffee cup down somewhere. So we've got just cowboy coffee, which is simply coffee grounds in a pot, and those coffee grounds are heated up to the point the pot boils, and I'm going to spill that coffee, so I'm going to leave that alone. But then the interesting stuff here, and I need to move these off the fire anyway, if I haven't burned them. If they're burned biscuits, they're basically pretty historically correct, because the cowboys at the time probably didn't have a great cook. There we go. Frank, I'll get a lantern over here and we can look at that. So interestingly enough, if you wanted to look at something in the dark on the trail, you had to find the lantern, light it, and then hold it up really close to what you're looking at. There you go. So there's a shot of the biscuits. Um, that's a very quick biscuit recipe. That's just batter mixed up, thrown on top of some lard, and cooked. Not even in separate biscuits, and then you just cut it up and eat it um, as you go. And then the next one's going to look pretty bland until I get a cup to scoop it up. We made a really simple beef stew. We had a couple of vegetables. We put some uh, potatoes and onions and peppers in with some beef, made a beef stew, probably a little fancier than they would have had on the trail. They might have had a couple of ingredients. Frank, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go over here and find my lantern again. I tried to eat some of this um, before we started, and I put plenty of spices in it. So there we go. There's our beef stew. And it's really good. That's my soup ladle right there, that coffee cup. But we got plenty of spices in it, and I couldn't stop my eyes from watering and my nose from burning, so I had to quit so I could talk to y'all. But I think it cured my allergies for today. So that's basically what they ate on the trail. It was very simple. Usually some sort of biscuit, or some sort of bread, whether it be a hardtack or biscuit with coffee, and sometimes you had a beef stew or beans or something to go along with it. But more often than not, it was basically something as simple as maybe a biscuit and some slice of salt pork or something like that, which would be similar to our bacon today. Basically, just salted pork that would stay preserved pretty well. And they didn't travel with things like onions and potatoes and peppers. They would trade for those along the way as they went. They would usually resupply at Fort Griffin and maybe at Doan's store up by the Red River, and they would buy coffee and sugar, and that's what they would use to trade with, or things like that. And that was kind of their currency as they went. They would trade for fresh vegetables, and then they would shoot game as they went. Very rarely did they eat their own beef. It was worth too much to them, but occasionally they would kill a big beef and butcher it. But that was a lot of trouble and a lot of work. So usually they're trying to do something that moves them up the trail a little faster, and then especially on the way home, kind of a minimal existence to get home in a hurry. And there another goal. They were in, winter sets in late here in Texas. Here we are in third week in November, and we've only had a frost or two and no freezing weather yet. And we're right about our average frost date right now. So if they were back this far south by this time of year, they were doing good because they were ahead of the worst of the northers and the worst of the cold weather. And that was another goal. They had to get their cattle sold and get home in time to stay ahead of the weather. And let's see. Let's Anjali, if it's okay, I'm going to start that PowerPoint, and
Sure.
I'm going to talk a little bit as it goes.
Yes, absolutely.
We've got a video of some of the state herd cattle, and
remember to select the sound as well.
I sure will. Okay, I'm going to do slideshow, share sound, and share. So I've got a video. I'm going to try to. There we go. And if that will play, maybe it will. Oh, there is the play button. So this is these cattle are actually part of a a play every year here in Albany called the Fandangle, and this is this year's Fandangle in last part of June, and we've got about 16 of the big boys out there on the stage.
Of spring, a beautiful sight to behold. Thou hast done a wondrous thing, and colored them red, rust, and gold.
And then here's some of our cattle out in the pasture, one of our big, three big groups, a few miles east of here. And we went out to check them and feed them, and they came up and ate a bite, and we got to count them, check them out, see how many new calves we had, see a few cows with young calves coming up in the back. That's usually the younger calves, and cows with the younger calves will kind of stay off a little further away off to one side or come in later. And we keep three big groups. Here we are turning out a couple of the young bulls with some of the older bulls and steers, and they're uh, in a hurry to get away from the big guys. These big steers are the same ones here standing in the pen behind me. So there's always curiosity to see who the new guy is and see what he looks like. Got to mix. All the younger ones in these pictures are bulls. Oh, here we go. And here's our group of young heifers we unloaded a few weeks back. Interestingly enough, the Longhorns really like to ride in the trailer, and we kind of encourage that. It makes them easier to load and unload and move around. Oh, and great. Here's our video of loading some of these guys in the trailer. They they know we're going somewhere fun, and they usually get fed really well when we get there. So I believe we were loading these guys up for maybe for Fandangle, loading them out of our trap down by the campground. So as you can see, I'm standing here holding the gate. I'm not rushing anybody. That's 1,800 pounds to do whatever I want right there in front of me. And I can talk to him and wave my arms a little bit, but unless he really decides he wants to get in the trailer, he's not going to.
And he's turned around.
Yep, and as you can see, there's a big steer in the trailer that doesn't want anybody else in with him. So that's always fun. Usually if you can load the big honor steer last, that works so much better because they don't stand in the trailer like Red is doing there and keeping all the young guys out because he has claimed the trailer for himself. Frank, did we load them successfully? I think. Oh yeah, we did. They did decide to load. I touched him with the gate, and he kicked at me because he said that was not okay. That I needed to stay further back. That's young Paint there in front of me. He's another one of our pets. And here they are in one of the big pens during the Fandangle. We keep them well fed, and they behave well. As a result, looks like we're unloading some of the last few, getting ready for the show. They stay up there at the Fandangle grounds for a couple of weeks, and we're performing the show a couple of nights a week. That is Muzzle Flash standing there, making sure everybody gets off the trailer. The one getting out now, that's Dogie. Dogie's he's over 2,000 pounds. He's one of our bigger steers. Here's one of our young bulls we turned out with the cows a few weeks back. This is Stars and Stripes. He was a little bit anxious getting out of the trailer. He'd never seen that many cows together in one place before. And they gave him a warm welcome and bullied him a little bit. But yeah, he's looking all around and wondering where all these cattle came from. So we rotate we keep and raise most of our own bulls. Since we have 4 different breeding groups, we can keep a bull out of one group. And as he grows up here, like Stars and Stripes did, when he's about 2 years old, we can put him out with one of the groups that he's not related to. So that lets us retain even more of our own genetics. Here we are back with another one of the big steer groups. These steers are more fun to look at to me than the cows, just because of their big sets of horns and their overall size. You notice we've got rings around the hay bales. That's not just to help save the hay, which it does, but if you don't put rings around the bales, the steers like to use the hay bales as toys, and they'll roll them through fences and gates and tear things up just playing with them. Here we are out at our grazing lease a couple of years ago. A few big steers, a few cows as well. If you notice, the cows aren't near as big, or the horns aren't as wide as the steers. The cows full grown, maybe 600 to 800 pounds. There's one of my really old steers. In human years, he'd probably be about 110. He was up around 20 years old. You can tell he looks a little thin, but for his age, he looks pretty good. There we are, letting out some young bulls in the trap here at Fort Griffin. These are all about a year old. We will probably brand most of these. We'll keep some for bulls and some for steers. We keep about 10 to 15% of our herd every year. Here we do pasture tours for individuals. If anybody wants to come out to the fort and see all the cattle, we had a professional photographer that wanted to come out and see the cattle and get some good photos. And here he is getting some pictures of the cattle. And I really think the cattle think we bring people out and give the cattle a tour.
Come on. Load up. Big guy, leave him alone.
Here's Daniel and I trying to talk these young guys into loading in the trailer. You really have to let them think it's their idea. There we got one looking at the gate. Eventually they do decide they want to get in the trailer. And once they make that decision, then from then on, for the rest of their life, they're pretty easy to load. So we kind of go slow and let them find the trailer on their own. There we go, having a little bullfight in the meantime. They'll sniff the trailer over, hop in and out a few times, and decide that's kind of a fun place to be. Here's a fun video. This young cow is eating some prickly pear. She's not out of good grass to eat. In fact, you can see there's probably some green grass back behind her. But the longhorns eat things that other cattle won't eat, including cactus, thorns and all, and a lot of things that would probably make other cattle sick. And if you notice, she's kind of picking her bites carefully, so she's not biting into too many big thorns. Occasionally, they'll get a few around their mouth, but they don't penetrate the skin on the inside of their mouth. They chew them up with their other feed. Here's our big group of big steers down at LBJ State Park. We have groups of steers at several historic sites and state parks around the state, and these are all bigger, older guys down there. I think they're all 12 plus years old now.
Where else do we have steers?
We also have cattle at San Angelo State Park, Caldera Canyon, Copper Breaks, and then we're going to turn some out very shortly at Fort Martin Scott State Historic Site. And that's in addition to the main herd here at Fort Griffin and our nearby lease. There's our CCC Rock entrance to Fort Griffin.
and keep me a natural.
I think we are back to the start of our slideshow. So that's kind of an overview of, you know, kind of our daily operations around here, dealing with moving cattle around and some of our herd management, which differs quite a bit from moving cattle up and down the trails that the trail drivers did. Interestingly enough, if you're moving a large herd up the trail, and you're moving about 2,000 head of cattle, maybe 2,500, and instead of moving those cattle up the trail with cowboys on horseback as they did, if you were to have to load those cattle in trucks and haul them, that would take approximately per a trail herd that size, that would take about 50 semi trucks. You had one cowboy driving per truck, it's similar number of cowboys. But today, if we were moving the scale of cattle that they moved up the trails back then, probably our best way to move them is still cowboys on horseback, because they were moving dozens of these herds up the trail all through the summer. Over about a 25-year period, we think Texas moved somewhere between 20 and 30 million head of cattle out of the state to be sold for beef at the railheads in Kansas and to other ranches for seed stock to their operations. It was the largest movement of cattle in the world ever. It was all done with cowboys on horseback. And the Longhorn may have only been the only cattle breed in the world that could have made that trip successfully on the hoof. So it was a really interesting time that actually worked out. And those trail drives brought all the money back to the state when Texas was pretty poor and really needed it right after the Civil War. Frank's out walking around with the camera again. Our steers are hanging out back there. They're fixing to take a nap, and we've overfed them today just to keep them friendly. So they ought to be hopefully laying down and taking a nap like your big steers would on the trail. If you had some thunderstorms like we thought we might this evening, instead of the rain's moved off and it's calmed down, we thought we might get to see what a thunderstorm on the trail looked like. And that was usually a recipe for disaster for trail drivers, because it made the cattle nervous. The cattle wouldn't rest. They would get up and down all night, and they were easy to spook and easy to scare. And a lot of times it would result in stampede, which is cattle running full tilt in the dark just because they're scared. And if you're a cowboy, the idea was to try to chase them down, get ahead of them, and turn the leaders back toward the back of the herd. And that would get the cattle in a mill, basically in a big circle. And hopefully the cattle would then tend to slow down and they wouldn't run totally away. Unfortunately, that didn't work very often, because important things like horses don't come with headlights, and you really can't see where you're going in the dark. The cowboys were actually riding by what they could hear. If they could hear the cattle off to one side or the other, and trying to get ahead of them. So as you can imagine, a cowboy on the trail was a pretty dangerous operation. Didn't pay real good. A lot of them weren't very old. Just high school age guys were pretty typical on the trail. You didn't have to know a whole lot. If you could ride a horse, that was about it. And they didn't get paid till the end of the trail. So a lot of times, as the trail drive was over, wherever they were delivering the cattle, whether it was to a railhead or to a ranch, the cattle, the trail hands would all get paid, and some of them would head straight home. Some of them would travel back with the trail bosses and lead steers, and some of them might not head home until after the holidays. They might spend the holidays or the fall and winter in Kansas City, and find another trail herd heading back a different time that needed help. So it was quite a different world back then. Basically, from Texas to Kansas, there were no fences, no highways, just a few known paths like these cattle trails. And it's fun to read accounts of these trails, these trail drivers, and realize that sometimes they didn't even know where they were. They would cross a flooded creek or river and assume it was something like the Brazos here at Griffin, the Clear Fork of the Brazos, write it down as such, and then travel on a few more days, and then actually cross the Brazos later on, and then correct their notes and try to figure out where they had been and where they're going. So it was, especially with the early trail drives, it was interesting to note how much uncertainty there was and exactly the routes they were taking. These cattle trails were, as much as 10 to 12 miles wide, and it was kind of a general route, not a specific trail like a highway or road might be today. So the fun part about the trail herd was a trail drive was, if you haul a bunch of stuff with you to cook with, you've got to do dishes that night because at daylight you're headed up the trail again, and so that's it was a lot of work every night to get everything packed up, cleaned up, ready to go, especially on the trip back because you don't have near as many hands to help with all the work. There's just a few guys managing the wagon and a few horses and cattle you have, so it was all hands on deck kind of operation to head back home. And I'm sure most of them were pretty happy to get back home before weather got bad, and then they got to do all the fun things, go hunting, if they had kids, play with their family, and through the holidays, and that's kind of the origin of the saying when the work's done in the fall that carried over to modern ranching and kind of finishing up the working cattle and weaning calves in the fall and getting that all done right before the holidays, and kind of the same mentality, work really hard, you know, um, until it's all over, and then rest and enjoy your life until spring and the work starts all over again. Uh, so that's Anjali, how's my time?
You're doing great. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah. We have a few questions already in our chat box, so whenever you're ready, we can jump into those. I'm sure there'll be other folks
Okay.
who want to jump in with questions or just have a conversation.
Yeah, let's do that because then we can elaborate on that and find out what else everybody wants to know.
Absolutely. So before I go to the questions in the chat box, I just wanted to ask you sort of a broader question, a couple of broad questions. The main place where the official Texas Longhorn herd is at Fort Griffin State Historic Site. How, when you all work at the site and you talk about the history of Fort Griffin and then you have the Longhorn herd, how do you combine that? I mean, what is the story there?
And the big story was and is that Fort Griffin was a fort for just a few years, from 1867 to 1881. And that is right through the heart of the time that the trails were active, which was also a very short time. So what all that was going on here at Fort Griffin at the time, well, it was an active military fort, a lot of soldiers coming and going, we're trying to protect the settlers from Indian depredations. And at the same time, we've got trail herds coming through, especially in the spring and summer, every day. The town of Fort Griffin that's off the hill to the north of the military fort is, just had a few hundred permanent residents, but any one day probably had a couple of thousand people in town. And it's just a very small spot in the road that it was just heavily occupied at the time because there was so much happening. And that's the main tie together, because all this was happening all at once right here in the same spot.
And then there's a question in the chat box, which is: are the Longhorns out of the LBJ Ranch in Johnson City part of the state herd? And
Yes,
how big is the state herd?
The state herd, everything together, cows, calves, steers, we keep about 250 head in the herd. That varies a little bit because we have about 100 calves a year, So as calves are being born, we decide which ones we want to keep and sell, and we'll keep enough to replace any older animals that die, and we maintain the entire herd right around 250.
So you're gonna probably wrap my wrist when you see me next for this next question, but I'll ask it anyway. For those of us that, don't know, talk a little bit about the importance of preserving this herd. I mean, why is it
Well, that's
important to
great.
preserve this herd? And, THC is obviously investing a lot of resources in doing that. So can you talk a little bit about why it's important?
Absolutely. So for several reasons, first of all, the history. The history to the state, it was, the Longhorns were the only cattle here in Texas from the 1500s all the way up until the late 1800s, kind of the end of the trail drives, before many other breeds began to be introduced. So all of that early ranching history, all of the trail drive history, the Longhorns are central to all of that. They did run wild here in Texas for a few hundred years. Their origin was Spanish cattle, but what we didn't really go into before was they ran wild. Some were turned loose on purpose. Some got loose by accident, and then they ran wild here in the state for 250, 300 years without any human influence. And really, Texas really made them what you see today, what they are today, because they're one of the very few breeds in the world that has not been heavily selected by human decisions to create a specific breed. Nature did that on its own here in Texas over those few hundred years, and that's what we end up with the Texas Longhorn. So they're absolutely almost totally unique in the world, and that actually happened here in Texas. And that's the big part of the history. And then we just went through the trail drives, the uniqueness of that in the world. And then they are, play a large part in shaping our early ranching history, making it what it is today. One of the things we didn't go over was the money from the trail drives. The ranchers brought that money back. They expanded their ranches. They bought new ranches. They built their communities, built their churches, built their schools. And that was the start of many of the smaller and existing communities today was money from the trail drives. I like to tell people, drive through the country where there's a lot of ranching going on, and it's kind of a fad now to put a big sign over your gate established, in a certain year. And 90% of those that have a sign over their gate with an established year, most of those dates fall in the time of the trail drives, and they were using money from the trail drives to set those ranches up to start with. One of the big reasons Texas in which is different from the other Western states, has almost totally private land is because money from the trail drives was brought back and used to buy land from the state and settle it. And a lot of our other Western states still have a lot of public land. But Texas does not, largely in part due to the cattle. When we get into more specifics, like things like genetics, Longhorns weren't, as we talked about briefly in the history, Longhorns really weren't selected by people for specific traits. So they retain a lot of genetic diversity that doesn't exist in any other breeds anywhere else in the world. So what that means is they're a big repository of important genetics that probably don't exist in any other cattle anywhere else. One of the best illustrations I like to give people, if you look at Herefords or Angus or any particular breed, you probably have a handful of genes that code for, that the cattle are black or red. And if Herefords, they have that specific white face and line down the top of their neck, and a few things like that. And that's in a handful of genes, you can pick out those characteristics pretty quickly. With the Longhorns, we have, that we know of, 17 different genes that control just the color of Longhorns. Since there's 2 to 3 alleles per each location, or per each gene, when you do the math, you end up with possible genetic combinations to produce all the colors in the Longhorn breed, over 600,000. Because, and that right there illustrates the diversity of the genetics of Longhorns in general. And that translates into things like disease resistance, calving ease. Basically, the Longhorns can take care of themselves and really don't need any help from us. They are fairly social animals, so they like to hang around and get fed. But if we were to disappear for 500 years and come back, we would have Longhorns everywhere. They don't really need us to survive. They need some open range, and that's about it. But no, to continue with the color genetics illustration, we've got about over 600,000 genetic combinations. All of those genes interact with each other and produce unique color patterns. So the possible actual colors of Longhorns is somewhere in the millions. Nobody actually knows because each combination produces a slightly different result, even if it's the exact same one combination out of those 600,000, and you manage to get the exact combination again, those genes have interacted slightly different, and the animals look slightly different because of that. So it's one of the neatest things in the world to see those color genetics play out. Frank likes to call it looking for Easter eggs because you never know what color egg you're going to find. You never know what color calf you're going to get. So that's kind of fun with the Longhorns. So that's the two big things: the history and the genetics.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. All right, so we have some questions about the food now. So
Wonderful.
starting with the beans, you mentioned beans,
Yeah.
which can have a long cook time. How
Yes,
would
they do.
camp or trail drive cooks have prepared something like that on a regular basis?
Exactly. So what they basically did was they soaked those beans in water, and as they're going up the trail, the camp cook and his chuck wagon would have a pan or a bucket of beans soaking in water, and the beans would soak up a lot of water, and they would cook fairly quickly if you put them over a fire when you got where you're going. An hour or two, you could have reasonably edible beans, and then the flip side to it is um, you can reheat those beans for many days on end.
Right.
And the saying goes with the cowboys, after many, many days of beans and coffee, a switch to coffee and beans is good. So that's a good question. It's really hard to feed a lot of cowboys in just a few minutes after you've been driving your wagon up the trail all day, like the cooks were. So they had to adapt. A lot of times their biscuits, they usually had some version of sourdough biscuits, and the sourdough was rising, in the pan as they went. And
Right.
all they had to do was cook it when they got to where they were going.
Got it. Okay. So Kay Evans Casey, you were right about soaking the beans. Thank you for sharing that. So Meg had a comment that, the cook would be preparing beans for several days in advance. I guess they would soak and then cook when they got wherever and then they would cook enough for it to last a few days before they had to cook again.
Right.
All right. Deborah is asking a question. Rustlers on the trip north?
Yes, there were cattle rustlers. You didn't worry about them too much because you had about 50 cowboys, and everyone that you could trust with a gun probably had a gun. The challenge to that was, the unique thing to that was, even compared to the military at the time, the trail drivers bought the guns that they needed that worked well and could defend the cattle well against rustlers and anybody that wanted to steal cattle or horses. So what they usually had was revolvers, a Frontier 6-shooter, and a rifle, Winchester saddle rifle or something similar, both chambered in 44-40. So their ammunition was interchangeable between the two guns. It didn't matter. You could use the same ammo in your rifle and your handgun. The rifles were, the Winchester design. They were repeating rifles, so they were lever action. You could as fast as you could cycle the lever, you could load a new round and shoot again. And of course, the revolvers would hold, up to 6 rounds each. So even if you had just a handful of guys with guns, you could very easily defend the herd. And the reputation got out that's the herds were well defended, and to basically leave them alone. Indian raids to capture horses were pretty common. But the idea was that if you were traveling through Indian Territory, you bought extra coffee and sugar for trading, and you made a gift of that and a good beef to the locals, and you didn't have any more problems as you went up the trail. So it was, it was kind of um, um, the fee to get through as you went up the trail, and it was fairly inexpensive, really. But you supplied some important staples to some pretty remote areas that really enjoyed seeing the herds come through and trade with them. So that was a unique thing.
Right.
That's kind of it in a nutshell.
So one of our attendees is asking for your biscuit recipe.
Okay, it varies. I don't measure anything, I know y'all have all heard that 1,000 times, but I'll tell you what, these biscuits tonight, and I haven't eaten one yet, so I don't know how that turned out, but these biscuits tonight was flour, evaporated milk, water, and salt. I think that was it.
Lord.
Oh, Frank said lard. Yes, instead of butter or any other, we use lard, and it gives the biscuits a unique texture that butter does pretty good, but lard does the best. And the trail drivers, that's what they would carry with them because lard, doesn't spoil. It's easy to carry. And what I usually do is, mix up the dough, everything except the lard, and melt the lard in one of these big cast iron pots, and then kind of roll each biscuit in it, and then drop it in line with the other biscuits. And about the time I'm done getting all the biscuits in the pan, I've used up most of the heated up lard, and then we cook them. The main thing cooking in these Dutch ovens is you put 99.5% of your heat on the top, and then you take the lid off every once in a while and look and see if they're done. By the time they're starting to brown on the top, the bottom is always done. So you don't have to worry about if the bottom's going to burn. Just don't put any heat underneath at all. And maybe warm ground from the fire. You could rake the coals away and just the heat from the ground. And that's it. That's
So Will, when you get a moment, if you can put down your best estimate of the amounts that you put in there and share it with us, we'll send it out with our email. That would be awesome.
I sure will. I'm going to grab one right quick, and we're going to see if they're any good. Because I didn't burn them. So that's like, that's like the camp cooks. There's the top.
That looks pretty good. Looks really good to me.
And the bottom is done. So actually smells pretty good. Not the best, but I've done better.
Okay.
Very good for camp cooking. Yeah, I'll share the recipe.
That would be awesome. Thank you. So Deborah asks, what is done with 85% of the new cows each year? You said you retain about 15%.
Right. We sell them. We sell them to people that want to build a longhorn herd or continue their herds. And we also sell a lot just at local auction. We can't, it's interestingly enough, we have enough that there's always extras, and the ones that with the prettier spots and color patterns sell quickly. But a lot of the solid colors, which is historically correct, we did have a lot of solid color animals here. The solid reds, solid yellows, solid blacks, even though they're historically correct, they don't sell as quick. So a lot of times those end up just going to the auction.
Huh, that's interesting. Meg asks, during the historic drives, if a steer or a cow would become injured or died and couldn't finish the trip, would they use the animal for meat, or would they just have to keep going?
I would think that they would use it for meat if the meat was okay to use. But certainly, if they could quickly butcher out part of the meat and take it with them. But that's a big animal to be able to, and you really couldn't preserve the meat. You probably didn't have time to set up where you could dry it and smoke it and things like that. So they wouldn't take a lot with them. They might be a good, at least for the next few days, a good bartering thing to take some fresh beef and trade for something else they needed.
Yeah. Meg has another question. Does beaver come from the state herd?
You know, not currently, but in the past, we've had four Bevos from the state herd, I think all back in the 60s and 70s. Some interesting stories. I don't remember all the details. Apparently, once they picked out a Bevo that was already a mature steer and wouldn't be easy to train, and sent him back uh, to be the new Bevo and with a trailer on loan. Uh, and they brought him back a few weeks later. Brought the trailer back a few weeks later with the steer in it. That one never became Bevo. He apparently tore up quite a few things. But yeah, we've had some Bevos from the state herd. It's been a few years.
Oh, I'm just curious, where do they get the Bevo? Where do they get Bevo from every time they have
You,
to?
you know, I had always heard that it was a private breeder that, supplied the Bevos. But then a friend of mine emailed me an application several years back. They were looking for a new Bevo, UT was, and anyone that had good Longhorn cattle could apply to have their steer be the new Bevo. And you kind of retained ownership in the steer and sponsored him through. Interestingly enough, not a lot of different than sending a kid to college. So, but you kind of sponsored him through, and he was advertisement for your ranch, and that steer got to be the new Bevo. We didn't have any of the right color at the time, and I think they also had to be fairly well trained and agreeable to showing up at lots of events. And they,
Right.
yeah, it'd be neat to do that again, but we haven't done that. So
That would be cool.
maybe someday.
Well, on that note, Will, tell us a little bit about the Longhorns' personalities.
The personality is very much, they're very docile animals. They got a reputation in historic Texas for being wild and mean because they were hunted for beef for quite a few years, leading up to the trail drives. They were kind of hunted like wild game. If you wanted beef, you could go shoot a big steer and have beef for your friends and family and neighbors for weeks. So they learned to fight and run away and defend themselves if they were cornered. And that's where they got the reputation for being wild and mean. And of course, the big sets of horns doesn't hurt any either. But most of our steers are pretty docile. They come to feed. You can bribe them with feed. They'll basically do whatever you want as long as you let them think it's their idea and their choice. The most dangerous longhorns we have are cows with young calves. Calf that's under 3 to 4 weeks old, the mother's going to be very protective and quite dangerous to anyone around her. So we leave the cows alone when they have new calves and try to get pictures from a distance. And then within a few weeks, she'll bring the calf up when she comes to eat. And it's interesting at that point, they almost totally ignore the calves because they know the calves are healthy enough and fast enough to basically beat any danger back to mama. And then of course the cows will take care of it. The longhorns actually do hunt down predators that might endanger their calves. If there's a coyote or a mountain lion or something stalking calves, they will not wait for it to become a threat. They'll actually go out, chase it off.
Wow.
They'll try to corner it and kill it if they can. So it's a pretty unique mindset in herbivores that they are very active in getting rid of any threats. But around people, they respond to how they're treated. It's just that simple. Even the bulls, of course, you really never want to trust a bull because they can be potentially aggressive. Most of ours are pets, and they want to be petted, and they expect to be petted. So it's a little bit unnerving when you walk out in the pasture and the herd bull walks up with a big set of sharp horns, puts his head down and stands there, and put my head down and lost my earbud. And it'll unnerve people and scare them. Gosh, is he coming after me? What's he going to do? And it's like, no, you have to scratch him on the head or he won't leave.
I've experienced that. I have experienced that.
And they're definitely persistent. We've got a group of young bulls now that really want to be petted, and I think they pride themselves on being able to sneak up on you and stand there and until you turn around and stumble over yourself because they're looking you in the face. But yeah, they definitely have their own. Each one has their own personalities.
So Teresa actually has a related question to what you were just talking about. She's asking about reproductive performance, calving ease, and then additional. You talked a little bit about maternal traits, but anything else that you might want to share?
So they have calves without any help from people at all. We never have any calving problems. Our first calf heifers, they'll have their calves out in the pasture with the cows. We don't watch them or help them at all. Um, they're very dependable. They'll have a calf every year, like clockwork. The old timers, their gestation is approximately 9 months before the cow has a calf. And the old timers said that the old cows would have, longhorns would have a calf every 9 months and 15 minutes. And a young cow, that is fairly accurate. From that age, from 3 till she's about 10 years old, they have calves, at least every 10 months. And the older cows will continue to calve up into their teens. I've had cows have calves as old as 18. At that point, they're not calving quite as regularly. They might have a calf every other year or every 15 months or something like that. But much older than beef cattle would be able to have calves. And yeah, the one of the best things about totally, disease resistant. They don't have any health issues. They don't typically contract diseases or get sick. So we have very little to do as far as treating them for anything like that. We do a little bit of preventive deworming to keep parasites away, and that's about it.
Cool. A couple more food-related questions, I guess. One is, how does Longhorn beef compare to other breeds for tenderness? And are there other breeds
Okay.
that's still raised for beef? And then how did the cowboys keep leftover food from spoiling?
Okay. So how does Longhorn beef compare to other beef for tenderness? It's not tender. It is a unique product. It's excellent beef. It's very edible. The challenge is it has, unlike modern other breeds, beef breeds, the steaks have no marbling, zero marbling whatsoever. So
It's lean meat.
it's
really
very lean.
Yeah.
It's very similar to some game where there's deer or elk or something like that, and it has a dark color like that as well. So if you expect to treat it like current beef or modern beef and slice up steaks and throw them on the grill, you need to do a couple of other things. You need to probably age that beef a couple of weeks, and then longer than you normally would. And that's usually up to your butcher, just to let them know do that. And then the other thing is to marinate those steaks in your marinade of choice, several days in the refrigerator. And then when you do put them on the grill, cook them at a low temperature and don't cook them too hot because you don't have any marbling in there to add moisture and fat as you cook it. So, but that's just for the steaks. Now, historically, Longhorns, most beef was cooked, chopped up in a pot with vegetables and other stews and other things like that, or dried as jerky or other preserved products. And that would be, the primary way if you're going to preserve beef would be to slice it up in thin strips and make jerky out of it. And whereas just maybe a little bit of salt and spices and the dryness preserves the beef. I don't think beef was salted that often. There probably was some, whether it's, corned beef or something similar, or, fermented or anything here in this part of the country. Definitely possible, but it wasn't the main way. Usually it was some version of drying or something like that. You might occasionally have some smoked meat and preserve it that way. Interestingly enough, I've heard a story that some of the early settlers figured out that a lot of the spoilage of their meat was caused by insects. So they would actually, have a side of beef or quarter of beef and have a rope and pulley system and pull this beef up into a windmill tower. And the theory was it got it above the level of the ground insects. and the beef would actually kind of form a crust, and they could lower it down every few days, cut off some more beef to eat, and raise it back up there away from insects. Uh, I don't have a whole lot of faith in that, but it's an interesting theory, and I think it was used quite a bit.
When you send us the recipe for the biscuits,
Mhm.
could you also send a couple of good book recommendations, fiction or nonfiction,
Oh, great.
that paint the picture of life on the trail during that
Okay,
time?
and
We've got a request for that.
I'll tell you two right now, and they'll probably be the same
Okay.
two I send. J. Frank Dobie's The Longhorns is excellent. If you don't know, he's actually part of getting the state herd put together. But and then the other one is, I think there's 2 volumes to this one. It's Trail Drivers of Texas, firsthand accounts of trail drives. So that's the two I would pick out.
And we'll find the links for that and put them in our emails to you all.
Oh, great.
Let's
Wonderful.
see. We have another question here about, were there any women participating in the drives?
You know, interestingly enough, not many women as far as moving cattle up the trail, but a lot of the early trail drives were almost like a caravan, to where, you know, there's a group of people traveling together for mutual protection. You know, and some of these people are going to one city and some are going somewhere else, and they would travel with the herds. Um, I don't think that was as common in later years, but especially with early trail drives, yes, there were, because they were just travelers along the trail with the cowboys and cattle. And I remember reading some early accounts of early trail drives that you know, they would have people join them for parts of the trip, um, and then stop off at their own destinations. So that's what I understood.
Got it. Okay. Kay Evans Casey again asks, where would one look for tips on cooking longhorn beef?
Tips for
He or
cooking.
she, they didn't catch all your
Man,
tips.
I don't know where to look for tips on cooking longhorn beef offhand. Usually make it up as I go. Thinking, Frank, does a CTLR have any resources online that you can think of for cooking beef? Yeah,
Well, what I got from you was
CTLR.org maybe.
because because the meat is so lean, you can't cook it like a regular steak.
Right.
You
Yeah.
have to marinate it and cook it slow.
Right.
If you're putting it on a grill, just low heat and cook it longer to make it more
Right.
tender,
Yeah.
I guess. So
That's the basics of it, and a little bit of trial and error doesn't hurt. But you know, that's the fun part with the marinades. You can keep trying something until you find something you like.
right.
But yeah, but the best part of, or the important part of that, is, you know, let your butcher know that, you know, we know this is longhorn and we know it's going to be tough, so can you age it longer? And the one thing that another modern thing that makes that the longhorn beef more viable as steaks and other similar cuts is vacuum packaging, because it's really easy to pull a vacuum packaged steak out of the freezer and, you know, throw it in the refrigerator, let it defrost in the fridge, and then just let it age in that sealed vacuum packaging for, you know, up to 10 days or so. And then if you have you know, some of the things you might use to, or some of the equipment you might use to marinate turkey or other things, you can inject your marinade directly into that packaging and just leave it sitting there in the fridge.
Right.
So that's what I would do. I'll have to look on resources. I don't know any offhand, but that'd
Okay.
be great
Well, if
great
you
to find
find
some.
any, please send them on to us.
Sure will.
Cuffy asks, does King Ranch ever purchase state herd longhorns to keep up their breeding program? Apparently they did that in the past.
Not recently, not that I recall. I don't
Okay.
think we've sold any to them.
Okay. And then Meg, I'm not quite sure what you're asking about, anything that works for game like deer. I'm guessing you're asking about cooking tips for deer, elk, leaner meats. I think it's the same. That's my novice cook brain telling me.
Okay.
Is marinate and slow cook, I think, with leaner meats. Let's see.
Right.
Any other questions from anybody? Please feel free to come off mute and jump in and ask your question if you have any. Otherwise, we are at 7:15 and 15 minutes over our allocated time. So it's really dark out there at Fort Griffin. So we can let Will and his team go. Thank you for that tip. We have a tip here. For deer, my grandmother always soaked strips in buttermilk.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's neat.
So we have one more question. Mary asks, what about religious beliefs? And Mary, if you want to come off mute and ask your question, because I'm not quite sure what specifically you're asking. Mary, if you're there,
I'm
please jump
here. Okay, I was wanting to know what their belief in God is, or their belief in God, and it seemed like there's the song that you were having was like the belief in God and how life is beautiful, and I was just wondering what you would say about that.
Maybe one of the Fandangle songs. Is that what she's thinking
I
about
think
during the
so.
slideshow? I bet
Yes.
so. Okay.
Yes.
I think the faith probably ran pretty deep out here on the frontier. A lot of people, there wasn't a whole lot else to trust in, so they really did lean on their faith pretty hard. It was a pretty rough existence out here. So I would say, yeah, definitely a big part of lives on the frontier.
And we have, thank you, Deborah, for joining us from St. Paul, Minnesota. We really appreciate that. Jackie is asking, Will, if you saw the northern lights out there last week.
We did a little bit. The sky was a little bit red to the north. It was more visible if you had a phone that would pick up the deeper reds, but you could see it just walking outside.
Beautiful.
It was pretty neat.
And then Phil is asking, is it true that the cowboys left the wagon tongue pointed at the North Star at night?
Yes, that's true. Pretty important if you got to park your wagon when it was not cloudy, because clouds might move in, or you might get disoriented in the night because you haven't been there before. But it was a good way to basically keep your navigation true, until you left out the next day.
So I was thinking maybe it was a superstition, but it was really more practical than that.
Navigation, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we are at the end of our questions here. I wanted to thank you, Will and Frank, and everybody else who was there behind the scenes helping you. We really appreciate you staying late and making this presentation. This is the second time you've done it, and it's wonderful as always. And for those of you that have not been out to Fort Griffin, please do visit. It is a beautiful historic site for the history itself, and you can go visit the Longhorn herd and hang out with the herd for a little while if you want. It's fascinating and phenomenal. They're just such wonderful, beautiful creatures, and they're great to spend time with. So please do that. And thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you taking time and sitting through these presentations. We try and keep them informal and have a little bit of fun. We hope that you enjoyed tonight and that you will join us in December, on December 18th, for our Christmas holiday virtual event, and we look forward to seeing you then. Until then, thank you all so much. Stay in touch, and we appreciate your support. Thank you, Will. You take care.
Thank y'all. Enjoyed it. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.